I asked a lot of my colleagues, the first thing, the name that popped up in all our heads for some reason was Lolita. So this is about Lolita, this is about her night out, and not being defined by a really questionable old man. So with us today, we have Kishwar Desai, we have Shobhaa, we have Karuna E, Parikh, and in conversation with all of them is Oindrilla Dutt. I'm not going to waste time and give introductions to any of them because you all know who they are. So off to you, Ms. Dutt.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Atri. Thank you, AKLF and Oxford. Great to be back here, actually doing an event, not just virtually. And this is Lolita's Night Out, Writing Female Desire. I think in 2021, unfortunately, women are still so conditioned and driven by society and their attitudes towards female desire and sexuality. And these impositions, as Simone de Beauvoir once said, are placed by women on their own sex. And today we have here with us Shobhaa, who has absolutely blown the lid of female desire and sexuality in her book, set in the world of, cloistered world of Marwari women, and she's done this through her very bold protagonist, Shilaji. I'd like to hold up the book for you, for those who haven't seen it. Lovely cover, that's Shilaji, and you can see Shobhaa doing that. And we have Kishwar Desai. She has unraveled the many layers of desire and sexuality of someone who was a trend-setting pathbreaker, Devika Rani, in her time. That's Kishwar Desai. And here to my right, you know her, we have Karuna E, Parikh, who's written in poetic prose, etched in poetic prose, the story of love and desire in a world that is full of explosiveness and divisiveness. I'll just hold up Kishwar's book, The Longest Kiss. That's about Devika Rani, and you just saw Karuna's book, which she held up. Shobhaa and Kishwar, I'm absolutely delighted to be in conversation with you again, and great to have you here on stage with me, Karuna. So Kishwar, I'd like to start with you. What made you choose Devika Rani? Was it a kind of empathetic bonding with this woman who broke so many norms, and yet she still managed to plan and negotiate her position at the top of her game?
I think it's muted. I think your screen is
No,
still...
I am not muted.
Okay.
I am
We
not
can hear
muted
you.
here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Should I talk a little louder?
No, you're perfect.
Okay. Well, I was just thanking you, Oindrilla. And, this is such a great show, a mix of virtual reality and reality. And yes, now about Devika. Devika fascinated me for a long time because, as you can see from the cover, The Longest Kiss, that is what she was associated with for ages, because she was also a very modern woman, and that was her debut film in 1933. And as you know, the kiss has been through many changes and in fact was banned for a long time in Indian cinema. So Devika was a rule breaker. She fascinated me also because she was international. She was truly international. She was a global superstar. Her first film was Karma, was debuted in London to rave reviews. No Indian actress has ever got those kind of reviews. And then when I stumbled upon her very passionate and very revealing letters to Svetoslav, that is when I realized that there was a hidden side to her that nobody knew about. And when you talk about passion, these letters run sometimes into 23 pages of unadulterated passion, love, you can call it desire, you can call it anything. So, but she was also very open with him, and she described a lot of the difficulties that she had faced. So, desire is not only physical, but desire is also to create something. And that was something that completely enchanted me about Devika. She wanted to make good cinema right from her early 20s, and she pursued it till she finally quit Bombay Talkies. But she was a very, very hardworking person who was absolutely open about her desires in many ways. So I think that was, you just hit the nail on the head by saying, why did I choose her? I chose her because she had this very passionate nature and was able to create not only great cinema, but also break a lot of the rules that existed at that time, including running away with a married man.
Yeah, we come to that. But I think it's also special that here was this great grandniece of Rabindranath Tagore at a time when she herself said all these floozies and tarts and prostitutes maybe came into Hindi cinema, sex workers and the like. She looked down on them because she didn't want to be equated with them. She had a position that she didn't want anyone to impinge on. So yes, she lived life on her terms. But I'm going to go to Shobhaa now. Shobhaa, you write in your book that Shilaji appeared to you out of the blue, and she imperiously demanded to be the heroine of your next novel. Take us through that process. How did it come about? And especially, how did you think of setting this mold-breaking woman in the Marwari milieu?
Hi, Oindrilla. Hi, everybody else. Everyone lucky enough to be present. Hello, co-panelists. And thank you again, AKLF 2021, for having me on this panel. Well, Shilaji is like Devika Rani, who actually lived and breathed and lusted and was lusted after. Shilaji appeared to me, it sounds esoteric, mysterious, and slightly mad, but like Shilaji herself, but it's exactly how it happened. I was meant to do a completely different kind of book, non-fiction, and the publishers were on their way from Delhi with a contract for me to sign the same afternoon, and there I was, and there was Shilaji saying, forget it, you can't write that other book. You're going to write about me. Now, was Shilaji an apparition? No, she wasn't. Or was she some ghost-like person from a Ram Gopal Verma film or any of these Booth Prates films? Not at all. But she was so vivid, so real, and I could hear her voice. I can even now kind of feel her presence. It sounds bizarre, but that's how it actually happened. And all of it that followed that moment. So when the publishers showed up, I had to break it to them that the book that I was about to sign a contract for was not happening, and Shilaji was about to happen. And of course, they had the option to say, sorry, but that's the book we're going to pay you for. If you don't want to write it, there's no contract, and leave after having Shandesh and Chai with me. But that it didn't happen quite like that. I'm very grateful to Simon & Schuster and my publishers, and Imanjali Shankar, my editor, and they loved Shilaji as much as loved creating her. And so there she is. And the world seems to have received her well. And Kolkata should be treating her exceedingly well, considering a lot of the book is based out of Kolkata. And she is a girl who's a product of Kolkata of a certain era and from a specific community, which is the Marwadis of Kolkata. So that's how Shilaji happened. Thanks, Oindrilla, for asking me.
Thanks, Shobhaa. Okay, Karuna, you've written really poignantly about love and desire and the barriers they have to overcome, not just against social fetters, but against barriers which are put up by religion and nationality. And you've written it lyrically, like women who write about desire usually do. I'm making the distinction about men, because they are far more raunchy when they write about sexuality and desire. There's nothing lyrical there. And I wanted to ask you, what attracted you to this almost impossible, forbidden love story of Daya and Aftab?
So for me, it was definitely the politics of it. For anyone who doesn't know what the book is about, Daya is a Hindu Indian girl, and Aftab, who is her lover in the book, is a Pakistani Muslim boy. And I just thought, you know, the political climate was ripe for a story like this. It is a story I've been working on for a long time, but it remains sadly relevant in this country today. But you know, Daya, who is the protagonist, she's not the only woman in the book. And when I was writing the female characters, I really thought about how I wanted to represent each one's sexuality and desire. Yes, yeah, exactly. You know, and we represent many different ages are represented in the book through the female characters. Many different classes, social classes are represented. And, you know, you have Daya, who has chosen, and mindsets, precisely. And so you have Daya, who has chosen to love a Muslim, Pakistani Muslim man, despite what society might say about it. But then you have her mother, who is older but has had things easier, for example, because she has a husband of the same faith. But in her case, you know, she is described as an extremely sexual and sensual woman, even though in the book she's probably in her late 50s. And so I didn't want to deny her that sexuality because of her age. And so there are, in fact, I'd say more love scenes and sexual scenes between the older couple than there are with the younger couple. Because that's something we don't talk about in India, you know, how, you know, sexuality is afforded to the young, but no, never to, especially, like, forget about the older women.
You're ready to go into the coffin.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was something I really wanted to give her mother's character, Asha. And, you know, and then you have Daya's best friend, Milne, who at one point very casually says that she's in a relationship with somebody. I'm not giving away any spoilers, guys, don't worry. But she says she's in a relationship with somebody, but it's only for the sex. And I also wanted to put that out, that is also okay, you know, that is also part of Indian culture now.
In fact, I found one thing very interesting. You know, the dichotomy in Aftab, his feeling for Daya, and his obvious tenderness, the warmth, the passion. And on the other hand, it's his religion, his background, his parents, his father, what he's taught him, the strictures he's put on him. He's constantly fighting that guilt, and that is so real, so often. In fact, even with the parents, there's a scene where they go home to his parents, Asha and Gyan, and he tells her very gently, you know, it would help me if you didn't always argue with them. It would help me not to take their side and have to go against you. So,
no, definitely. And that is very, I've done that on purpose, you know. I wanted to write a book where the women come first, you know, where the women are, you know, they're these very strong, dynamic characters, and the men are beautiful, but they are not in the limelight. And, you know, you do say that you were talking about the way I've written about sex and desire in the book, and that it is lyrical, and that it is very different from how men tend to write these scenes. And I think it's very important to remember, and I'm sure my co-panelists will agree with me, that, you know, I think for so long, the woman reader has been denied as well. You know, because men wrote for men. They didn't even expect a woman to read it. You know, I mean, women were completely removed from the intellectual space, including the woman reader.
That's interesting, and I'm going to ask Shobhaa a little later about this, taking off from that thought. But first, I want to ask Kishwar, as you said, in 1933, she had what was called the longest kiss, which was meant to be 4 minutes, but I think actually was about 2 minutes. And there was this man lying inert because a snake had bitten him. So she was doing all the kissing, and then they got married. And yet in 1936, I think, she runs off. She eloped with her leading man, Najam Hussain. And that itself was unheard of in those days. To do so from the position she was in, never mind the reasons, I'm not going into that now, I'll leave that to you. But what is fascinating is that she came back to the studio, to Bombay Talkies, and to her husband, Himanshu Rai, on her terms. In that era, how did that happen? When people were so judgmental about women, where there were such strictures about how women were supposed to behave, what was acceptable?
Right. Thank you, Oindrilla. That is a very, very interesting question indeed. And because we must remember that Devika, right from childhood, had trained herself to stand up for herself, to fight her own battles. And at the age of 11, she was in a boarding school, and that's documented in the book from her letters, where she's refused some food in the boarding school. She's in England. And then she decides from that time onwards that she's never going to ask for anything. She is always going to be dignified no matter what happens to her. But there are, you know, she marries Himanshu despite opposition from her family. In fact, her mother doesn't even know that she's got married. She learns about it from, in fact, cutting from the newspaper headline in the Hindu. And then she writes and says that has she really got married? And so she decides to marry a man who is 16 years older than her, because she wants to explore this world of cinema, even though it is very traumatic. Again, I won't go into all the reasons why it's so traumatic for her, because she discovers heartbreak, betrayal, a lot of things that Himanshu does, which are not very, good for her. But in many ways, and even exploitative, because she ends up selling all her jewelry, her fine clothes, whatever she has. But she sticks with him. She's immensely loyal because she believes in the idea of Bombay Talkies. So she is, Oindrilla, which fascinated me. She has her head screwed on very firmly. She is fascinated with the idea of making good cinema. She's a very intelligent girl. The first script, Karma, was actually written by her, which nobody knows. Even I didn't know this till I stumbled upon it again in one of the archives. In her own handwriting, she has written the script, and she is never acknowledged because of the patriarchy that existed at that time. So she was meant to be, always the second person in the studio. I think somewhere this riled her because she was immensely intelligent. And she says so later on after Himanshu's death, when she takes over Bombay Talkies, that she has she cannot tolerate slow people or these men, who think they're so great, whereas she has to constantly handle them. So she's very bright, very intelligent, very passionate. But in 1936, we discovered through her letters that something indeed awful was happening behind the scenes. Himanshu was showing what could be considered early signs of his nervous breakdown. He was an immensely talented man, but he started physically abusing her. And this was something that she kept quiet, but you read those letters and they are heartbreaking. The way he beats her with the script and she kind of falls down bleeding, and yet she continues working even when she's ill, even when she has her periods. And this is what comes out astonishingly. She talks about that as well, that how sometimes she's bleeding for 10 to 14 days, but she continues to dance, continues to complete that scene, comes home and collapses, and that set me thinking how tough things must have been. So in 1936, she decides enough is enough. She's not getting acknowledgement in the studio anyway. This very, very handsome, he's extremely handsome, Oindrilla. I mean, I fell in love with him just seeing him on screen, Najam Hussain. And he elopes with her. They go away to Calcutta. She's persuaded to come back on her own terms. Now, I want to point out, this is entirely Devika. She was able to maintain her dignity even in the most difficult circumstances. You see the film she makes afterwards. There is no sense of nervousness, of humiliation. In fact, the replacement for Najam, who is Ashok Kumar, is so nervous. He's hilarious because he thinks Devika is going to gobble him up or something, you know, because she's this man-eater. And Devika is cool as a cucumber. In fact, she plays the role so well. She carries off the film. Ultimately, she proves to the world that if she's talented, if she's smart, if she's intelligent, then even her sexuality, she can do what she likes. And that is what the men around her find very difficult, but there is not much they can do about it because ultimately, as you see in the book, she gets rid of all of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
Terrific for her. Okay, you know, once Germaine Greer said that it takes courage and independence for a woman to design her own image, and not that the society decides to reward if she's a certain way. And also, she also said something else that's very interesting, that if a woman doesn't let herself go, how will she ever know how far she could have gone? And I think of this in Shilaji's context. Here's this girl in a typically conventional, hidebound Marwari society, family, where girls are taught to deny their sexuality. It's like it's a sin to have pleasure of that kind. Yet, at the same time, they are taught to go out and look for a suitable husband, to put their best foot forward to do so. Absolute dichotomy. And I wanted to ask Shobhaa, have these mores still, are they still prevalent? Have things changed for the better? Have things progressed in the last few decades?
Oindrilla, I wish I had an optimistic and wonderful answer to give you and say that yes, things have progressed. Progress itself is a loaded word. And have things changed? Yes, they have changed. In terms of women being a lot more assertive, perhaps. But has society changed towards women? Not that much. So assertive women are still looked at and regarded with a huge amount of hostility, suspicion, and almost a kind of subliminal fear. And the fear is about a woman's sexuality, and that's what I find almost laughable or amusing, because a sexual woman is a threat to society. A woman expressing her sexuality is a threat to society. And when you're talking about Devika Rani and you know the other book with that wonderful love story, it is again how readers and society at large perceives the way these women are projected through fiction. And in Kishwar's case, of course, it was not fiction, but a person who lived that life. But when there was a reference to managing men, it's a very interesting comment, because a lot of strong ladies with a mind of their own who'd like to have sovereignty over all of themselves, including their bodies, their emotions, have to spend a huge amount of energy managing men. Why? Because the men, no matter how brilliant, no matter how evolved, no matter how woke, I hate that word, but I have to use it, there may be surface and deep, there is a conservatism, which is something I find almost, the contradiction is so apparent in what they appear to be, what they say in the public domain, and what the real life situation is. Like in Devika Rani's case, who would imagine that a lady with her accomplishments, her beauty, her confidence would be at the receiving end of the most awful physical abuse? But that is the story of a lot of women. And even in Shilaji, people have asked me that, isn't it a contradiction that here's a Marwari girl who's broken all the rules, gone ahead, she's living her life on her terms, and yet she takes physical abuse from the one man she actually falls for. But yes, it happens, there are things that in life and in situations where emotions are invested, And in love and sexuality, there is no logic, there is no reason, there is just madness. And there are times in the lives of women, the most together women I know who are so successful and beautiful and financially independent, who have gone through the abuse and no one wants to talk about it. So women's lives are complicated and they are tough. No matter who the woman is, whether it's a Devika, Rani, a Shilaji, or a person we know who's, it could be us. So, these are society's secrets. And it's through fiction and non-fiction, it's one way women writers have of expressing what they wish to, and it is an unfettered world to that extent. So to answer your question, society has not changed towards women, but women themselves have changed, and a lot more women really couldn't give a damn. Thank God for that.
I know, thank God for that. And I think there's a very interesting analogy here. You know, women, female repression, rape has been used as a tool of war for victory and to get power over women. And today, especially you see that in Shilaji, you mentioned also financial independence, which Devika Rani thought was so important. She wanted that at all points in time. And today, it's almost like women are using the same tool, the same weapon, to wield power over the men who would repress them. And that I find was a very interesting thought, what you just said. Okay, I'm going to come back to you, Karuna, with that same train of thought. On the one hand, you have a love story, which is this tormented and fragmented one of Daya and Aftab. And on the other hand, you have the perfect union of Asha and Gyan. And it's almost as if you're holding up a mirror to show that this is what a perfectly synchronized relationship, an equal relationship would look like. And maybe you can continue from where you started. What is it that's special about Aftab and Daya to you? And obviously, this couple, this older couple, is very special. What makes them tick for you?
So I think what makes Aftab and Daya so special is the fact that they're crossing barriers. And there's one line in the book where they've just made love, and Daya turns to Aftab and she says, every time we make love, we're crossing borders. And he replies, no, we're not, Daya, we're rejoining lands. And so I think that is, that is what's special about the both of them, because, it is an India-Pakistan love story. And yes, you're very right about Asha and Gyan. I kind of wrote that as an idealistic love story of where you hope, a relationship ends up after years of understanding each other. And there are bits in the book that tell you that Asha and Gyan weren't always so synchronized in their love and their actions. They too took years to understand how to get there. But you would hope a good relationship does reach there eventually. You would just talk about marital rape, and we were talking about Devika Rani and the abuse. And I was thinking about a different female character in the book, which is Kamla. And Kamla is the housekeeper at Asha and Gyan's home and Daya's home. And her story is interesting because she is someone who actually escapes a house of where, she is going through marital rape and going through horrific circumstances, and she actually escapes that.
And this is her refuge.
Yeah, and that is such a power move, For me, she's a real powerful character. And I did want to write a woman of a different class who's dealing with something, that is so beyond the sphere of privilege for women of privilege to sometimes even comprehend, and sometimes not. Very often women of privilege are dealing with these things as well. But I wanted to put that in the book as a very stark comparison. And, I think it's so important to tell real life stories like The Longest Kiss, to give the real life women who have created characters like Kamla and Shilaji, to free them, because these are the stories we need to tell. And yes, so many more women do not give a damn, but very often I completely agree with you, Shobhaa, that the men have not yet caught up. You know, so when I look around, I often say, especially in my generation, I see a lot of women who, you know, are feisty young feminists and who really don't, you know, give two shits. But you do have the men who are slowly catching up to that. And I don't think it's their fault, because patriarchy works both ways. Patriarchy works to hold men back as well within those shells where the male ego is so center and front, without realizing the dynamism of relationships and beauty that, of interaction that comes like Asha and Gyan's when you shed that. You know, so I do hope we see more of that. And I do think, you know, movements like the Me Too movement, you know, things like Tinder and Hinge and Bumble have put female sexuality into, you know, the forefront of conversations at least. And maybe we're not having the right conversations yet. We definitely don't have the answers, but at least we are asking the questions. And I think that is important. And with the Me Too movement, I'll just say that, you know, one of the very, very fascinating things for me that came about when I was listening to conversations at that time was many women asking themselves, why didn't I say no? Or why didn't I leave? And I think that's an important question we need to ask. You know, why do we, and coming back to where you started, you know, with whose quote was it? Simone de Beauvoir. Germaine, yeah, the first one, yeah. That we're so often. So I think that conversation has begun finally in the public domain, and that's very interesting.
In fact, Germaine Greer, a little unkind at that time because there were so many other circumstances and things weren't quite right, said, I don't have time for people who say, casting couch, I needed the job, so I did it. All I needed to hear was a no. Not quite that black and white, perhaps, in
but
that
we,
time
we
and
need
age.
all kinds of
Yes,
feminists,
yes.
so, you know.
And, you know, to answer, to echo what you said, another of the American feminists, I think it was Steinem, I'm not sure, said that we finally, women, are trying to bring up their daughters more like boys, like sons, but they still have to get to the place where they bring up their sons more like daughters. And I think that might answer Shobha's point, might be something that she would like to ponder over. That yes, we do need to bring up our boys to think more like women and not be ashamed of it. Okay, to go back to Kishwar, you know, Kishwar, here was this woman who didn't fit into any mold. She smoked, she had affairs, she used, probably, and dumped men like Omeo. And through it all, she ran the studio with a really hard head. She would not let these men, the Shoshadhar Mukherjees, etc., get the better of her. And she managed to get the shares, to work her way through it all, whether she charmed people or worked on it business-wise. But then came Sviatoslav Roerich. And this was the unimaginable true love of her life that she had never thought she would get. And you write about it like it's almost spiritual, at the same time sexual. As you said, the desire is very evident. Their letters are so explicit, and even the descriptions, like they're in public places, and he wants to indulge in PDA. So tell us about that phase, and what was it? How did she walk away from it all? She had it on a platter. She was at the top of her game, and she left it all, and went into almost, well, seclusion. How did that pan out?
Yeah, Oindrilla, basically, I think at that time, Devika was a widow already. We must remember that. She was not only a widow, she was a Bengali widow. There were certain restrictions. She writes about that in her letters that were expected from her to wear white, to take off all her bangles, to do this. And she rejected all of that. Not only that, she continued to act in cinema. She did not stop acting either and wearing all the kind of colorful clothes she always did and the glamour that accompanied it. So she was always a rule breaker. But even before Sviatoslav came into her life, there was another director, Amia Chakravarti, with whom she had a full-blown affair, which again I've written about, and he had tuberculosis. So she had already nursed one ill man, and it was obvious that this Himanshu, when he was having his mental breakdown. So it must have been very difficult for her. But you know, this is Devika. She's tough. She decides to send him to the best sanatoriums, the best hospitals. She's loyal to the core, and the person she loves with passion. She does not hide any of that. But then she keeps on thinking that how can this be possible? Because, you know, she needs somebody whom she can actually look up to. And that's when, through a sheer coincidence, you know, there is a letter from Bharti Sarabhai at that time. And she writes to her saying that she would like to visit her studio along with Svetoslav Rorik. It's just a coincidental meeting. But bang, the moment they look at each other, it is amazing. It's like they have always known each other. And within a month, they are writing passionate letters, are going up and down. I mean, the telegrams are going up and down, you know, sometimes 3 a day, 4 a day. And it's kind of quite amazing how much love and desire. And he, I have to say, Oindrilla, this is what is important. He's a very unusual man. He comes from I don't have to go into the details. He comes from a very unusual family. They're all intellectuals. And he respects what she does. He does not think as other men, and she describes that in her letters, as other men in Bombay think, oh, she's an actress, so, you know, she'll be an easy lay or something like that. He respects her work. Yeah. And he respects the fact that she even thinks like that when she was a young girl, when she was trying to earn money in London, she worked as a makeup artist for old women. You know, she used to go to their homes and do, and he writes to her and says, look, that's fine, because I know that you were working hard, you've always been a career woman. This man supported her. And I think that is what she was looking for. Somebody who respected her for what she did, someone who would also, whom she could respect, because he was a great artist. And also came from the spiritual family that she was fascinated by. And when she goes there, she's so keen to, you know, indulge in all of that. And you know what people don't realize is that Devika actually just keeps describing herself as a country girl. She loved animals. She had a little farm kind of thing, even in Bombay talkies, you know. So she loved that. She was delighted that he had cows and horses and goats and whatever, you know, and she wanted to take walks. And so she happily became a recluse. But again, one last point I want to make, Oindrilla, is that actually she became the big support for Svetoslav, because he almost fell apart after the death of his father, the death of his mother. Then his brother goes back to Russia, dies there, and he's isolated. You know, this lovely, very intellectual, very kind man who loves her, but he's also very sensitive. And so she becomes not only his muse, but also his caretaker almost, and lover, of course. So I think she used to pray to Saint Francis, yes, I think it was Saint Thomas.
Saint Thomas.
Sorry? Saint Thomas. She used to pray to him and say that, look, just give me, I will take all the abuse. I will take all the cruelty. I will take whatever you give me. Just give me a reward at the end of this. And she always thought that Svetoslav was her reward. It's very sweet, you know, that kind of love and passion. And Oindrilla, if you read the way she describes Svetoslav, oh my God, I mean, it's like no man could describe a woman the way she describes him, with all the attributes she gives to him.
A lot of physicality.
It is like desire. It is plain and simple desire.
You know, I think another thing was he never tried to use her. And that was something new in her life. And he actually tried to tell her that don't give up acting. You'll miss it. Do it sometime.
Yeah.
And she just didn't want to have anything to do with this world anymore. And
he was also very sexually active. Yeah. And this was something she had not known, you know, because Himanshu was, as I said, much older, and they got into production and blah, blah, blah. But Svetoslav wanted to make love on the beach, in the car, in front of people. I mean, I won't name all the various things, the bathtub, that, you know. This was like something so new and so lovely for her, you know. Yeah.
Okay. Shobhaa, Shilaji is this really bold Marwari girl. And you have spent a lot of time, you've laid emphasis on her fantasies, which is so unusual in that setting, her fantasies and her sexual liberation. It's like the ultimate release for her, freedom for her. The power she has, not just over men, but to break through the barriers and conventions of that Marwari household. And I wanted to ask you, do you think it's really happened or is happening to a certain extent that it's time for women to stop shaming and being shamed? Is that something you wanted to say through your book?
I'm not sure if it's all about shaming and being shamed is the core message, or if there was any specific message at all. It was a character that I had constructed who fascinated me, and fantasies were very much a part of this character. For me to write those fantasies was important because the fantasy lives of women, even that is judged by society, because half the time, of course, a woman won't even discuss her fantasies, not even with her closest, not even with girlfriends. But a woman has a rich tapestry of sexual fantasies. And for whatever reason, she's even guilty within herself that she could be having these thoughts. Now, we have no control over our fantasies, or we oughtn't to. Our fantasies are what free us, what liberate us. And I wanted to put them out there, even a young girl's fantasies. A lot of people, readers, have been shocked that how can such a young teenage girl brought up in that specific environment, how would she even know about what would be termed, I guess, deviant behavior? Well, in my book, there's nothing called deviant. You know, a fantasy, you cannot judge someone else's fantasies, and you really shouldn't judge your own. So our imagination is sometimes what frees us the most. And especially women's lives, which are, as you said, they're so constricted, so restricted. For a lot of women, what escape route do they have, if not fantasy? If they can't live it, that's really a tragedy. If they can live it, I mean, I think it enriches anybody's life. A fantasy lived is your ultimate dream. So Shilaji does have these fantasies, and I was very keen that they're interspersed throughout the narrative at different stages in her life. And because the book is about self-discovery, it's about a woman who's really unfettered in many ways. She does not censor herself. There are no filters. What you see is what you get. And there is a certain purity and a certain tenderness in her, almost an innocence, even in her sexual escapades. She doesn't know she's meant to feel so terrible about her body. She doesn't know she's meant to feel guilty about the relationships that she indulges in. So she is truly a free spirit. Free spirit, not big, you know, when we sometimes talk about women being free-spirited, what we are saying in polite terminology is that she's actually a nymphomaniac. And, you know, women like that are a threat to our society. But that's not the point. The point is we're entitled to, however we wish to live our lives, on whatever level, whichever plane, it's our life to live. And Shilaji, in a way, symbolizes all that. She symbolizes freedom. And what Kishwar was saying about Devika Rani looking at a reward at the end of her life and praying to St. Thomas, well, Shilaji spends a lot of her time not praying at all, but hoping for a relationship that is fulfilling and that is respectful and full of grace. And I think towards the end of her life, she does find it. Though, like Karuna had mentioned, adult sexuality and middle-aged sexuality makes society extremely jumpy. It sort of makes them go, ew, you know, how can you even talk about it? But it is something that we need to talk about. I mean, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, whichever age, are entitled to have a rich sexual life if they choose to. And society had better get used to that too, that idea.
Thanks so much, Shobhaa and Kishwar. Karuna, unfortunately, we see that it's women and their judgment and their views on sexuality and desire that very often stop other women from getting the best out of their sexuality, from enjoying it, from living life on their terms and liberating themselves. Do you think that's changing?
I do, and I think the internet has a lot to do with it. I think that, you know, we are moving into a phase where sisterhood is being so celebrated, And I love that. I think that it's, you see celebrities voicing this as well. For me personally, I spent my, teen years and early 20s being a tomboy, and so being much closer to young men. And I have personally been guilty of saying, oh, but, they're just the girls, they're the chicks, they're boring, oh yeah, they're, bitchy, and actually not exploring the wealth of female friendship, which I have now discovered in my 30s, and which is actually my most wonderful support system. And I do see more and more women around me, and thankfully younger women who are not as foolish as I was at the time. So I do see that, and I do love that. And obviously when I was writing my book, I wanted to, Daya is surrounded by young men, and she has this
And
gang
that's a
of
wonderful
boys.
relationship, Wasim and Aftab.
It is.
And Daya.
Yeah, and I wanted her to have those male friendships, which she has, and they're very gentle and they're very loving as well. But my friendship with Daya, as I was writing my protagonist, needed to be one completely not of judgment, of course. And as I was writing it, and as I was writing her sexuality, I wanted to not judge her choices, and I wanted to give her those free choices, right? So for example, she is the one who wants a sexual relationship with Aftab. He is the one who doesn't. He's the one who's saying, maybe not, maybe we shouldn't do this. Is this a step we want to take? But I wanted to give her that power. And this comes back to, I think, what Shobhaa was just talking about, that honestly, I think women are denied pleasure because in pleasure is power, in pleasure comes choice. And I think it's absolutely terrifying for a patriarchal society to imagine what a satisfied woman will do. And we see it all around us. We see it at all ages. And of course, yet women are meant to be presented as perfect. You are meant to look sexy but not be sexual. You are meant to, God forbid.
Those age-old society,
Exactly.
impositions.
Exactly. You are meant to wax your legs but not show them too much. You are meant to, and the list is.
You're meant to be attracted enough to get the right husband, but not
someone else's husband, God forbid someone else looks at you. So I think that, we are bound by so many of these unwritten rules, and every woman knows it, every woman knows it, and we are so aware of ourselves as sexual beings from a young age, and not for our own pleasure, but for other people's, and I think, I recently saw something on Twitter which was so alarming. Someone had put out a general poll, and they said, what age were you when you first understood that, someone is viewing you as a sexual object? And, there was age 3 to 10, there was age, 11 to 20, there was age, and bang on, 3 to 10 was what every woman had voted. And that tells you exactly how, we are victims of the male gaze, but we are never allowed to, return that female gaze without being slut-shamed. And so I do love that I see that changing. I love that so many of the dating apps actually put the power of choice towards women, and they had to do that in India because of rape and because of the fact that we live in a society that's not safe for women. And so it was, these companies sat down and said, okay, how do we make this successful in India? Because women are not going to meet a random man at a bar. And they said, you need to put the choice in women's favor. So, I do think that as the woman emerges as a consumer, and that's why financial independence is so important. So as the woman emerges as a legit consumer.
Which we see in both Shilaji and Devika.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We seize other kinds of power as well, including sexual power. So I'm interested to see what the next few years bring with that. Yeah.
Great. Let's hope that it's going to bring a revolution, though I somehow doubt it. Kishwar, we have enough time for quick questions to end this session before we take questions. So I'm going to ask you, what would you say is the inspiration that women can take from the very forward-thinking, path-breaking gutsy Devika Rani?
I think the main inspiration for me, where Devika was concerned, was to just be yourself. Be confident, be yourself, have your wits around you, do not get bullied, do not she never used to listen. That, as I may have told you, she even preserved all the anonymous letters that were written to her, which were trolling her. She did not mind that at all. She did not think that these people had the power to change the way she saw herself. And neither did she indulge in gossip, nor did she try and push her way through anything. She remained true to herself. So I think being confident and being able to deal with men on their own terms. This is what she did in every board meeting she went to. She went well prepared. And like Shobhaa said, she had worked on the men beforehand so that they were like putty in her hands, So she was not going to be taken for a ride. She was always prepared for whatever game she was playing.
And I love the fact that her dignity, her inherent dignity, stopped her from trying to make a sob story out of her circumstances, which is
Absolutely.
why a lot of people misunderstood her and didn't give her the respect due to her. Okay.
Absolutely. They thought she was aloof. They thought she was a snob, but she could not let anyone close to her, especially in the Himanshu years and even later, because they would discover the truth. They would discover what had actually happened to her and how much she had suffered. By the way, it was Saint Anthony. I made a mistake.
I said
it was
Saint
Saint Anthony whom
Yeah.
she used to pray to.
I said Saint Anthony. I thought I remembered that. Only Franz, I think, knew that she was being beaten up. Okay, Shobhaa, you've always not stopped from calling a spade a shovel, always not minced your words. So tell us, how easy or difficult is it to write about female sexuality and desire? Is it tough? Was it tough?
No, Oindrilla, the thing is not to question it, not to think, is it going to be easy, is it going to be tough? You write what you want to write, you stick with your truth, and let the others deal with it however they choose to. The onus is not on me. And every act of writing, especially when you're writing about women in the sexual context or otherwise, is a political act. What you're saying, the way you live your life, there's nothing about any of our lives which can be described or is devoid of sense of politics. So when I choose the characters I do, it's with the full knowledge that I take ownership of my writing, I take ownership of all my decisions, I take ownership of all that comes with it. So I'm not there to moan and groan and say, oh my God, why am I being trolled? Or why are people reacting in this way? I know what I'm doing because it is the truth I wish to write about and share. You're free to reject it, but I'm not about to change it and I'm not about to alter it because it makes a few people uncomfortable. And that's pretty much how I have lived my own personal life. That's the way I've written over 40 years. That's the way I'll continue to write for as many years as my fingers work with a laptop and my brain is still intact and people still want to read me because, there comes a time in your life where you say, yes, I'm doing what I'm doing, but is anyone interested? I hope to die with an interesting readership. Still saying we want more, and that will be the ultimate for me, the ultimate compliment as a writer.
I don't think there will ever be a time where you're not interesting to the public.
When they don't want to read you. And may that continue, Shobhaa. Absolutely fascinating for everybody, whether it's the column or books like this or non-fiction. Karuna, I'm going to end with a question to you. Before we take questions, we just have about 7 minutes. When you write, as I said, women tend to be more lyrical, gentle, soft about female desire. Does it ever bother you that you may be judged because you're writing female desire and sexuality? And does that hamper you or influence you in any way?
I didn't think about it much, and I think one of the things...
Are you careful, for example?
I don't think I was, and I think, when you're writing, you can't be too careful because then you're not putting the truth out, So I think one of the big struggles and why the book took me so many years to write was actually shedding all those ideas of what I should and shouldn't say. And when I reached a place where I felt confident I could write in that tone, I think that's when I finally sat down to write it, where I had shed all those previous ideas I had about how one puts these things. And I do think it's also been my privilege to have, for example, someone like Shobhaa, who I have, grown up with this sort of iconic voice, and so many others who have paved the way when it comes to writing female sexuality and desire.
And that's also very important, the guts to put it out there and to be a pathbreaker, to take the flak if you have to, but to make it easier for other women.
Exactly. And I don't think I'm a pathbreaker, but I do think that there have been people treading that path before me who have made it much easier for me to write this book and not have to think about my protagonist being sexual, not have to think about penning a scene, a passionate lovemaking scene, because those things now seem much more natural to put in. It's a love story I'm writing. It would be ridiculous to write this love story without those things. And yes, even in terms of writing it, it's not an overtly sexual way of writing. It's not raunchy. But it is my privilege that I didn't have to write it like that, because I didn't have to prove anything, because others came before me who did that for me. And I do think that...
sorry.
Yeah.
You have questions?
Okay, great. So yeah, I'll just wrap up and just say that, the one thing that I would like to say though is that, in this time of love jihad and all, I think that is the truly subversive thing about the book. Not so much the sexuality, apart, this is...
the politics of it.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. We're going to take questions quickly.
Yeah, so these are questions online. If there's any question here, please do raise your hand.
Yeah.
So the first one, I'm going to rephrase a bit because of the language. It's a long question. Basically, is India a land of Kama Sutra just for the male gaze? And not
just
really
for the male gaze?
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll ask Shobhaa to answer this. Shobhaa, is India the land of the Kama Sutra just for the male gaze?
Well, let me first say the Kama Sutra is the biggest con we've pulled on the world. It's fantastic how people in all kinds of destinations that I go to ask whether we actually live the Kama Sutra in our lives. And I say, of course we do. And I urge them to do the same, and I'm sure half of them probably have a neck brace at the end of it all, and all those contortions. No, the Kama Sutra is actually a philosophy, and it's much deeper than the way it is projected. It is a celebration of sexuality in its most intimate and also its most complicated. Yes, you have to be an acrobat for most of the postures and all of it.
Unbelievable.
But then, land of yogis too, we know yoga is what we've almost given to the world, but is it strictly from a male gaze? Well, it's written by a male, so obviously the perspective is a male perspective, and I think a lot of women who are writing today are giving an apt answer to the Kama Sutra gaze of looking at women. So it's all good, it's fine. It existed when it did in a certain context. And we are free to write our own versions of Kama Sutra from our gaze if we so want to, and we should.
Thanks so much. Next question.
Are there any questions here? Okay, this is actually from me, so.
Is that it?
Yeah, so I really wanted to know that when you're writing female desire, is there anything at the back of your head which says that, only women are going to read it at the end of the day? Because the moment a woman is writing about women, sadly, they're put into that entire bracket of, it's a women's book, it's a chick lit, it's whatever. So does that play a hand in the way that you're writing, or you're completely okay with, we don't really care if it's just women reading?
Should I ask Kishwar that? Kishwar, did you get that?
Yeah, I got that question. Yeah. I'd love to answer it actually, because it applies very much to my book on Devika Rani. To begin with, everybody questioned, why did you call it The Longest Kiss? Because it sounds like a romantic novel. It doesn't sound like what it actually is a serious book on Indian cinema, on the life of one of the greatest actors of our time, especially the last century. So I'm saying that, this question definitely came up many times, that female desire, focusing so much on Devika, was this going to go against the main thesis of the book, which was that she was a modern woman and she was somebody who stood up for what she believed in, and an intelligent person. But I find that now it was a little subversive. The title, we had many battles. It was a very subversive title. I decided to put it out there very deliberately. I could have done a very, roundabout way of saying the same thing. But I also wanted men to understand that women do things with passion, do things with as much as they do, but they also have a physical side. They also have something that they bring to the table, whether it be romance, whether it be love, whether it be their own gaze. And in Devika's case, it was definitely she who chose her men every time. So I'm saying it was a tough decision. And so far, I think the book has done well. So I think I'm crossing that barrier. But yes, it was a difficult decision to begin with. Yes.
I think
I just want to add to that, one of the problems I think female writers face is whether you're writing about desire or not, men very often just don't want to read women. They think they deserve an intellectual superiority where they're not going to read a book by a woman. So I think we can't even afford to think about whether they're going to read it if the sexual parts are more female. I don't think you can even think about that as a female writer. You just write. You just have to put your voice out there. That's what I think.
I think that's a great note to end on.
Oindrilla, may I add to that?
Yeah.
Oindrilla?
Yeah, Shobhaa.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. To take it forward, what she just said, and to take it in a slightly more light-hearted way, yes, men get a vicarious thrill, let me tell you. They pretend they're not reading the book. At every lit fest I've ever been to, it's the men who come up to buy a book and always add, I'm buying it for my girlfriend, I'm buying it for my wife, I'm buying it. It's all, they never say I'm buying it because I want to read it. And also had people ask me at a lit fest such as this one, that, Madam, and all those sexual things you write about, is it all about your life? They ban that question. And then there are the others who say, Madam, on which page are all those kind of scenes? So it's like, they're going to quickly skip the rest of the book. So you get all kinds. But of course, men read our books. And I don't care why they're reading them. They're reading them for the cheap thrills. Well, go ahead and get your cheap thrills, but buy that book and read it. I really don't care.
Great note to end on. Thank you so much. That was Lolita's Night Out, Writing Female Desire. We couldn't have had a better panel. Thank you so much, Shobhaa. You know it's always a pleasure to do this with you. And Kishwar, the same for you.
Thank you.
Karuna, this has been a first and it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for making this so good for me. And thank you to the audience. Thank you, AKLF, for choosing this venue. They always do heritage venues. That is something that's special to AKLF. So thank you. Thank you to Atri, the entire team, Maina, everyone.
Thank you.